The bees are cleaning up the extractor. It's 48 degrees today, so you can see the bees are pretty active. I've got activity in the front of all three of these larger colonies, especially this one. Pretty good activity over here as well. So it's warmed up. I have found, because this one is kind of down in a low point in the field, they tend to become active later in the day. I've got some hives a little further up the rise there, and the sun hits them sooner, so they tend to come out earlier in the day and then shut down sooner. The hives down here in this little low spot, and you can actually feel a little bit of a temperature change when you walk from down here just up that little slight rise because of sun exposure. So the colonies down here become active a little later in the day, but they stay active a little later, and then the ones up the hill are just the opposite. Got a bee here. She was on the side of my extractor. So I put out my extractor so that the bees could clean up the honey residue in it. When I came back, she was on the outer rim. So the high today, she was right here, and she was motionless. When you would come up, you might have thought that she was dead. And so what I did was, I just picked her up and put her in the palm of my hand. The high here today was 48. And bees have to be able to get their flight muscles warm enough to fly. Best I remember, it's somewhere above 90 that they have to warm their flight muscles up to be able to fly. I'll double check that, and I'll type it in at the bottom of this video. But when it gets too cold for them, they just simply can't hardly move, and they definitely can't fly. And so, but I have found sometimes on days like today, because what has happened is the temperature has dropped. And so she was probably on the side, or I know she was on the side of the steel container, and the cold air, as the shade overtook this part of the field, the temperature dropped, and that was heightened by the cold of the steel, and it just got too cold for her to fly. So she was motionless until I put her in my hand and began to warm her up. So you can see there that she's starting to move and doing pretty well. So what I'll do is I'll take her over and I'll put her in front of one of the hives. I have no clue which hive she's from, but at least we'll give her a fighting chance. We'll put her at the entrance of one of the colonies, and hopefully they will let her in. But that's just some information about the impact that the cold has on bees and their ability to fly. Here's a bee that is on the side of this piece of tiling. She looks completely dead, and may be, but I'm going to hold her in my hand and see if I can warm her up. Another bee. Looks like there's a decent chance it just got too cold. We're going to see if we can warm it up. Okay, we've got a little bee warming experiment going here. Hey, look how she's coming back to life. I blew a little air on her and she is going. You see her there? She was absolutely lifeless when I picked her up. Held her in my hand, started blowing on her. I'm going to take her over to one of the hives, if you can see her there at all. Getting a little life back. Okay, these two bees are coming back to life. I mean, they were absolutely lifeless when I picked them up off the side of a plastic container in an area where I was feeding. I'm going to put them at the entrance of this hive. I have no idea which hive they came from, but at least now they have a fighting chance. I did this to just illustrate the impact temperature has on honeybees. I put those two bees inside this colony, and that one's doing some exploring. She came outside, the other one went on inside. All right, looks like she's going back inside. Hopefully they'll accept them. Two more workers. Okay, this is a continuation of my temperature experiment. All of these bees were lifeless at the bottom of my extractor. I mean, like a number of them curled on their sides. But I picked them up and I put them in the palm of my hand. I've been blowing on them some, just letting them warm up. I mean, not one single bee was moving when I picked it up. And as you can see, a number of them are now crawling around. In fact, most of these bees, I see at least a little movement. These bees had been in the bottom of that extractor, and they were eating the honey that was left in the bottom of that extractor. But when they were doing so, the sun had been out, but then the extractor ended up being in the shade, and the temperature dropped quickly, and they just could not build up enough heat to fly. So you can see they're all coming back to life. Even a couple of them flew. I'm going to take them back down to the hives. I just put a couple of bees that we'd warm back up in front of this hive. So we're going to try to put the rest of these here and see if they'll go in and if they'll accept them. Okay, we're seeing which ones are alive. Actually, several have crawled in. As you can see, some are not going to make it, but there have actually been several to crawl in, and a few of them have even been flying. That just a moment ago were absolutely lifeless. And we do not know for sure if this colony will accept them, but we know they would not have had any chance at all had we not warmed them up. So you just saw one crawl in this corner over here, and that's, I don't know, third or fourth in this bunch that I've seen go inside. Gradually they're going in. So my hope is they'll accept them. So as you can see, all but two of them have gone inside. The bunch I laid down, I had some still got in my hand. One of them has started, well, both of them have started moving. They just weren't warm enough yet. Now these two colonies are in the sun. In the early part of the day, the sun, there's nothing that is blocking the sun coming in. I've got them facing south, and so you can see the sun there is shining directly on them early in the day. And so in the morning, they're pretty active, as you can see from the front of these hives. This hive is facing south. It's a little bit shaded. They do have some activity out front, but because of where the sun is, my truck's down here because I'm doing some varroa treatments. Sometimes that tree right there casts some shade in the late morning on the front of the hive, and so that will impact the flight and activity of the bees. The bees in the cold months, I'm guessing this morning, I haven't checked the temperature, I'm guessing we're in the low 40s, high 30s. They need the sun on the front of that hive so they can warm up their flight muscles. Typically a bee is going to want her flight muscles in the 90s. I think the average in some research I did was around 94. Now some of your guard bees, they can fly in the low 80s as far as their flight muscle body temperature. But having the hive facing south and the sun shining on them, they can come out on this landing board here and warm up their flight muscles in the sun before they take off. Conversely, look at this hive. This hive typically has quite a bit of activity, but it is facing north. It really needs to be turned around, and so I will do that. But this particular colony is facing north right now. It does not get direct sunlight, and I've got my truck in the way, so that impacts the sunlight on the hive as well. And you can see there's almost no activity coming out of this hive. So the point I'm trying to make in all of this is that with my colonies, in the winter time, when the temperatures drop, the sun plays a tremendous impact. The amount of sun, the amount of shade, whether or not it's on a high place here where it gets more sun, or whether it's down in a low place like down there where it gets less sun in the early part of the day, all of those impact the flight patterns of the bees, because the bees need to be able to warm up their flight muscles to fly. Basically, when a bee's body temperature gets to about 45, then it is paralyzed and cannot move. I'll need to get my truck out of the way, but I moved this colony, or turned it so it's facing south now. That should help them in the cold months. I put some brush in front of the entrance that forces them to reorient and re-memorize the hive's orientation. As you can see, the bees are learning the new entrance. It is facing south, and I already see more activity on the front of the colony. There was absolutely no activity facing north. Now, to be perfectly honest, I did pick up the hive and twirl it around, and so that is going to influence the activity of the hive. But it's probably been 15 minutes or so since I did that, and I do think, in addition to moving the hive, that having a little more sunlight may also be helping. Now here's the downside of rotating a hive during the middle of the day. They have memorized the entrance being on the north side. So you can see I've got some forager bees trying to figure things out. Now, they will figure it out, but it'll take them a little while to do so.